All right, I am extremely excited to talk about this story. This is something that I grew up on. This story, and it was just totally fascinated with the saga. I'm actually gonna put my cheaters on here, which I don't normally need, but um, guess I got to be vulnerable at some time in my life, right? So this unsolved mystery. This is the thing I grew up on, right? This we're gonna talk about the probably most popular unsolved mystery in American crime history. Um, the audacious act of skyjacking a 727 passenger jet, and we're gonna go into the whole model and everything that this guy did, to make this jump happen, to get away with it. This case is so popular that if you think about the most famous people in history that have went missing, you've got, I mean, basically, the big ones, the Jack the Rippers, the Amelia Earharts, the Jimmy Hoffa, which is also an interesting story I hear as involved in this case as well.
There's a connection.
The Zodiac Killer and DB Cooper. That's why we're here. We're going to talk about DB Cooper. So, um, not only is he a guy that did this, not just one skyjacking, but two, which is the controversy we'll get into. He's the only guy that got away with it. And from the 60s to the 80s, with all the hijackings and skyjackings, DB Cooper, the name that's out there, is the only one that got away. Everybody else was killed or captured. And I know there's something more to this guy. We're going to talk more about him. And not only am I, again, super excited to build a relationship with you, Rick, but we get to talk about who Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. was. And Rick McCoy III is sitting here with me right now, to tell the true story, the real story after 50 years. It's finally coming out of not only was your dad DB Cooper, but he is also the one and only true real McCoy, in my opinion. So, Rick, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited being a skydiver myself and just being a fanatic in that space and looking at this mission or his mission, I guess you could call it. And all I guess I should say the trauma and everything that you and your family went through as a kid, and even now, why 50, almost 53 years later, we're going on, are you coming forward and telling everybody after even your dad was, basically denied as a suspect after all those years, and the FBI said, "Nope, it's not Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. It's we don't know who it is. Case is closed." Why is the case all of a sudden been reopened, and why are you sitting here today?
Um, Guess we'll just go back to 2020 and like a lot of people, rough year for me, but rougher for me. I lost my grandmother and my mother that year, and with that, there was a lot that we just didn't talk about. So, one, my mother was culpable in both hijackings, and my grandmother was very close with my father, so we just didn't talk about it publicly with a lot of things. And then in 2020, after the passing, the big thing came out was the evidence that I didn't know existed, and that was just going through belongings of both my mother and my grandmother. The big one was finding the actual parachute, and
Which is the only piece of evidence that was
that was yeah. So we can go back a little bit. And I believe 2017 they actually closed the case on DB Cooper and the FBI, and essentially said the only way we'll reopen it is if there's physical evidence, and with that it would be money, which left the plane, or the parachute, which left the plane. Everything else that didn't come on the plane with the skyjacker. So, and I don't know, it might have been 21. There was a YouTuber, investigative journalist who was really into my dad and all that, and he'd been trying to contact us for years. I got emails back from the early 2000s. I just always ignore it because through years, I've been contacted by a lot of people to try to get me to talk, and we just never talked. So my dad's buried on the family farm, and right next to that his grave is what we call a pack house, which is a fancy shed. And he went up to the guy that was renting a trailer in the front, asked, "Hey, do you mind if we go and look in here? And have you seen any military?" And the guy actually knew exactly, and he took Dan right to a trunk that had what would you call it? It's not a parachute. It's the pack,
The container.
the container.
Yeah, the harness and container that
And
parachute.
why that matters, and you and I have discussed this at length at this point. It's one of a kind. Why, it's a very unique, um, yeah, artifact because it's one of a
We'll
kind.
definitely get
We'll
into
get
more
in. Yeah, you'll
details.
be actually
It's a
be able
highly
to
modified, customized parachute that wasn't normal back then whatsoever.
right. And again, there's a lot of things like experts like yourself can talk better to than I can because his military, this guy skydive itself. I'm not a skydiver. I went a couple tandems as a kid, and that's my experience. So I can't really speak to it, but I do know that there's the FBI had the parachute rigger. I think his last name was Cossey. He gave the FBI a description.
Cossey.
Earl Cossey. Yeah, he gave the FBI a description of the parachute, and it's, as you say, one of a kind. So, and
And
with
and we'll get into more details later, but Earl Cossey was a guy that was asked by the FBI on the DB Cooper case.
correct,
First jump.
the
'Cause
first jump.
There's two jumps we'll get into so people understand, because people only hear of the big DB Cooper jump, but there was another jump, 5 months later,
Yeah,
which was your dad,
my dad was convicted of.
which he was convicted of, yeah, and then everybody said, "No, it wasn't him, wasn't your dad on the first jump, it's still an unknown, that's why the case kinda closed."
My dad was considered a copycat.
Yeah, so Earl was the guy who gave the parachute that night to the FBI because of the ransom letter and what
Correct.
he needed, his resources. "I need, fuel trucks, I need parachutes, I need $200,000 in cash, 20 small bills." And then 2 parachutes were delivered, 2 systems from
3
a
systems,
main
front
and a
and back.
reserve, and that's why this thing was so unique. So that's what was found, was that parachute
Correct.
that was given to the FBI,
Now it's given to the FBI.
and that was in what state?
Oh.
Washington?
Washington State. Or, yeah, given to the FBI back then, yes.
And then you found the parachute in this pack house in North Carolina,
correct.
which is interesting too. Okay.
Yeah.
So really cool stuff we're going to get into here to break down this case, because a lot of people have called you a liar. They're like, "You're the son of this guy." And I
Well,
think
yeah,
that's
when I mentioned DB Cooper, without mentioning who the known hijacking that my father did, even though my dad was famous at the time, obviously he gets lost in history compared next to the name DB Cooper, right? Like he was actually the only person to do the exact same thing, get away with it, and have time between getting away with it. Because other people kind of tried to do it. It was a day or two that before he got caught, and that was because of my aunt. And we can get into that story, but he had actually got away with it technically. If it wasn't for somebody blabbing, he actually did pull it off again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before we get into all the details, who's Richard Floyd McCoy III? Who are you, man? What do you do on a daily basis? What have you been doing all your life? And where are you at now? Because I know you're a person that loves to help people, and
Yeah,
share that story real quick.
I'm a coach now. I've pretty much dedicated my whole life to martial arts. So as an outlet, I was really into sports as a kid. So I started judo in like 3rd grade, got into wrestling. Early on in the mid 90s, I watched one of the early UFCs. So that's what I want to do. I got in a fight, my first fight like a month later, very unprepared. But anyway, so went all in MMA and martial arts. Got multiple black belts now. Run, but historically, definitely the most successful fight team out of Virginia.
Yeah, you've had a massive pool of fighters out
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Probably one of the biggest pools there was, I think.
Yeah, out of Virginia. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many black belts do you have?
5.
5 black belts.
Yeah. So, and from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to judo, traditional karate, and so sambo, and I've competed in all those as well outside of MMA.
Okay. Awesome, man. Awesome. Um, well, dive in, maybe start with childhood. What was it like growing up with this, this thing around you? This, I guess, it could be a dark cloud or whatever it is, running from the FBI, mom, grandma, all that
I mean,
stuff.
there's so many stories like I mentioned earlier. My earliest memories are that obviously that affect not affected me, but that's how I started or I remember is my earliest memories are visiting my dad in prison. And another thing my dad's very known for, he's the only person to escape from Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, which was also quite the feat. Um,
Not an easy place to escape.
not a easy, and there's a lot of stories around that. Yeah, and
We'll get to that detail too, 'cause I think that's really cool, especially with his military special operations background. And I think there's some things that I've kind of ID'd as I read through the case where I'm like, oh, I know where he got that from. Oh, I know where he got.
which is very cool. Right.
Yeah.
Because I've told you even some mindset stuff that my mother would mention to me, and you're like, of course, yeah, of course that's it. Which to me didn't necessarily make sense, but to you it did. Um, so yeah.
So you visited him in prison, and then grew up. How was mom in this case? Because you said she was kind of a collaborator
Oh,
with.
she was definitely a collaborator, and it was very odd in that that part was known, especially for the second hijacking, but it was still we just couldn't discuss it. And I believe the FBI, all the authorities knew that, but because they were married, and my dad was very definitive that he wasn't going to testify against her, and
Sure.
essentially that and I actually, and I mentioned to you I was kidnapped right after my dad was killed. That was kind of the thing that there was this big thing between the families
Oh,
that
yeah.
they blamed my mother.
So they're trying to get you and your sister away
Yeah,
from
yeah, my
mom,
mother.
who is potentially a collaborator with dad and this whole thing.
Right.
Wow. Wow.
A lot of things going on as a young kid.
So did you get snatched up and then taken away and then came back? How did
Yeah,
that
I
all.
got snatched up, and then that's a little fuzzy for me because I was so young. Um, I believe it was 6 months that, we were essentially hidden from my mother, and then my mom got us back because I think, like, my 1st grade year kinda just didn't happen because between that and then essentially hiding us from the other side of the family. I know it sounds really weird, but and then we ended up moving back to Utah, which is actually where my dad was convicted of air piracy. And as you can imagine, at that point, it was very fresh, and everybody knew who we were and what we were. And that was very interesting because growing up, essentially having parents not even letting their kids play with you. Obviously, I had nothing to do with it, but that's some of my earliest memories of kids not being able to play with me,
Mm,
which was odd, but yeah, and terrible parenting. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay. And your sister's older than you?
Yeah, and she's 4 years older than me. Well, she'll say 3.5, but, she has really different, feelings and memories about it. My mom would always say that I idolized my dad, and my sister essentially had felt like she was abandoned by my dad.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely different, relationship. Well, she was older and definitely felt different about my dad.
How do you feel about that now? I mean, I know I asked you earlier about you because you received or you found a letter in 2020
Yeah, 2020.
from your dad. And
Yeah.
what did that letter say?
Um, I'll tell the story. It was, my grandmother was towards the end, I was hanging out with my grandmother. COVID, the blessing of COVID was, towards the end of my grandmother's life, I got to spend a lot of time with her. And one day she just asked me to get something out of her dresser, and I opened up a dresser, and oddly enough, I've seen so many of these back in the day, obviously no email or whatever. So it was a letter or a envelope from Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, which I recognize as a envelope from Lewisburg. But the odd thing was my name was on this letter, And I just I looked at it, picked it up, and I looked at my grandmother, and she just started crying. Sorry. Um, sorry. And she just started saying sorry. And the letter was literally, I'm going to be within 2 weeks of him breaking out of a prison. And in a nutshell, it was a letter telling me that my life's about to change, and he was sorry.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was more than that. Like, and I actually kind of wish I because it was a kind of cool thing, but it was seeing it 50 years later was pretty. Yeah, I don't know how to say it, but it was surreal.
Yeah.
I didn't know the letter existed, and I don't. And I to this day, my grand outside of my grandmother telling me she was sorry, she never explained to me why she never showed me that letter.
Probably to protect you.
Yeah, I assume so, but I don't.
I think it's an innate thing a parent would do.
Yeah.
It's like, look at how many people struggle when kids are born and they're, families that are divorced or they're adopted and they're like, let's just not tell them because it'd be better off. But then they find out later and it's like, well, shit, now I've got abandonment issues in the later part of my life, where my sister had it earlier and I didn't, now I have it. So like we all deal with that. And, I think that's where it sounds like
Yeah, like I
emotion
said, it
comes
was just
from.
odd to find it that many years later. I mean, surreal was more. I mean, it was for me. You asked how I feel. I still idolize him outside.
I think a lot of people do.
I mean, I think
I mean, we'll get into his background, his military history. It's just incredible, man, what this guy was who he was, what he was capable of. And it's hard not to look at a guy like that and go, man, it's I forget what do they call it? The guy in the movie that's the bad guy, but that you find a relationship with or something with. I forget what that's called. Like Nero, what's that called? A dir- not antagonist or protagonist. It's yeah. Anyways, but you know what I mean.
right, right.
Um, So, yeah, I mean, that's where I kinda grew up on that story. I was like, "Whoa, that guy did that." That's aw it wasn't like, "Oh my god, somebody freaking skyjacked a plane and took a bunch of money." You're like, "No, he jumped out of it," which is unheard of, and, like, there's just an immediate interest and mystery there that you can't help but
Well, and
to
obviously,
like.
it's a big part of the story for my dad, but and obviously, in a lot of ways, that's why I'm here, and that's what everybody focused on. But you got to think that my dad was bigger than life in a lot of ways, militarily. Just in like I I can say I'm proud of this. I've never met somebody that truly knew my dad. It just didn't come up to me and just tell me what an amazing, like, they would go out of the, not just, oh, he was a good dude. Like, your dad was one of the most amazing, like, go out of the way to tell me. He'd give you a shirt off his back. I don't care what he did, what people say. Your dad was so much more than that. And that was 100% of people that I've met through my life. Like,
Yeah,
not this, like, your dad was one of the kindest, nicest people that, and, and I believe that. And that's what I've always been told. But it's also growing up knowing what he did and also having to defend that. And not that I felt like I had to defend it, but people would attack. And I've been attacked, and it's very odd because I don't think poorly of my dad. I mean, I obviously made a bad decision. I can think it's cool or not, but I can understand that it was a poor decision. And, but will and can never change how I feel about him.
yeah. It
So,
was your dad,
yeah, it was my dad.
and his history, and history in our past is something that we just simply now know, and now we know it, and now we're looking into it, and it's kinda fun,
And
you know?
we'll get into there was a lot of whys, and there's a lot, I know some insight to the whys he did some things and where he felt trapped and where he felt, uh, I guess I'll just say fucked over by the government.
Sure.
And, there was reason.
The VA, go figure.
The VA, yeah, the VA, go figure.
Well, do you want me to I would love to uh, maybe dive into his military really quick. I think
Yes,
that
yes.
helps establish, especially for a lot of our listeners and viewers here, they'd probably be interested of how his military background connected. Because when I first started looking into this case, it was kind of like, all right, dude's a helicopter pilot from Vietnam, gets out and just skyjacks an airplane. Like, and then of course I started looking into it and people started seeing his military career, but there's a lot of, even on these investigations and documentaries that I've looked into, a lot of people have gotten it wrong. And I think a lot of military special operations guys would agree with me when they look through this case and see this stuff. Um, but in a nutshell, and then we'll dive into some of these bigger pieces. I'm just going to read it off. So Rip list his military career. So, Salt Lake City, he was LDS growing up, Mormon.
Yeah, he was raised in rural North Carolina,
Okay.
military, so they were actually all over the place. But
Yeah.
the family farm was in North Carolina where he's buried,
Okay.
and he went to BYU is why he was out in Utah.
And then he dropped out, enlists in the Army in 1962, goes Special Forces, becomes, and this is where people you'll see in the documentaries or a lot of the literature out there that says that he was a Huey pilot and a demolitions expert. And as soon as I saw, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. You can't be both of those at the same time. And then diving in deeper to his, now you have all of his military records and his whole life. And he was an 18 Charlie, which is a Special Forces demo or explosives expert. Did 2 tours in Vietnam. And this is where it kind of got interesting for me looking through his history, working in an A team in 1964. So you guys that are history buffs, you kind of already probably see where I'm going with this, conducting counterinsurgency advisory, keyword, missions with the South Vietnamese against the North Vietnamese. And so being in 64, 65 and all that, that's a unique time frame. And then later, as we'll get into a little bit more of that, but on one of his missions, he's out there surrounded by Viet Cong and gets fragged by a guy. There's a story. I think I should read that story.
It's a good insight to him.
And why it's a good insight to him, because the handwritten story that we have from his dad states this real, when you say he's a good man, right? When you hear all the letters and the words from other guys that he served with, or everybody you ask, the guy was a solid, he's a good man, right? He's not a nice guy, he's a good man. There's a difference.
Yeah.
That story really kind of showed to me what a good, solid, true warrior is. And a warrior is something that can balance the opposites, right? And then something that we as warriors struggle with all our life, just like look at martial arts, we struggle with the balance of opposites. And I think he, in that time when he got fragged, right before he goes to kill this guy, there's this epiphany, right, of what decisions I'm making right now in battle that determine success or failure. And you can get killed just like that. And so I'll get to that later, but he gets his Purple Heart. And also being a good man as a Mormon, he would go on leave and do missions.
Yeah,
Instead of going home. So again, a good man there. Then comes back from Vietnam, goes back to school, BYU, for criminal justice.
Yep.
And stays in the reserves, goes from high school to flight school program, the warrant officer program, starts flying UH-1 Hueys, OH-23, CH-34s, OH-58s later on, C-13s. I think he was rated in like 6 different helicopters and was also a fixed-wing pilot as well. So this guy's incredibly skilled. So he's now, previous to his helicopter career, he's, a special forces guy working in Vietnam, and then all of a sudden gets out, goes to be a helicopter pilot, and then goes back to Vietnam. As a helicopter pilot, now, I saw the units that he was with. I know he was one of the cab units and a couple other units, but this guy goes in, and then you can see all the heroism now, right? You don't see a lot of stories or heroism from his special forces time in Vietnam, but then all of a sudden he gets 2 Army Commendation medals with Valor. He's got 2 air medals with over 100 combat missions with Valor. He's got, because there's 2 Oak Leaf clusters on that. And to top it all off, he's got a Distinguished Flying Cross. And just a few minutes ago, we find a Bronze Star in his medals that you brought. And I'll show those here in a little while. And then starts pushing out, does his second tour from 68. I'm sorry, gets out for a second tour, does 1968, 1970, goes to Germany, which is where you were born.
Right.
And does his last duty station there. And then comes back and gets back into his school and flying for the Guard.
Yeah.
And then started having problems. Now, where does that happen now? Because
so his dream, and this is where it's ironic, I guess, that his dream was to be law enforcement.
Which is hilarious.
Yeah. Well, and this is where I'll get into some other evidence that has come out. Like, he a paper essentially early, way almost a year before he came up as for a paper, essentially The Perfect Crime, which was a skyjacking for ransom.
A year before the
Um,
DB Cooper
yeah.
case, he wrote a
It
paper
was at
in
least
school
months, yeah. It
in
was
criminal justice
yeah.
on how to do the perfect skyjacking.
Mhm.
Wow.
So, and that yeah. So
Does
that's
anybody have that paper?
my sister does.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, my sister has been real so, obviously, I have a lot of the big stuff but my sister has been really meticulous of going through paperwork, and there's a lot. And then a lot of it when I say paperwork, letters, and a lot of his military records, and so a lot of, like, the list I gave you, my sister put together. Um, she's better at it than me, but she's been yeah, just and like I said, when my mother and my grandmother passed, my mother had some, but my grandmother essentially worshiped my dad and obviously, lost a son. She kept everything.
Everything. Yeah.
I have, like, I have all we can this kinda getting off, like, I know where certain things are. I have all these things that have yellow tags on them, and there was from, the FBI because after my dad was killed, they auctioned stuff off. She just kept the tag of everything that she got from the auction that when my dad was killed.
Mm.
And she would just separate everything, like, almost like she had a shrine to him. So it was, somewhat easy to go through things, even though I didn't really go through a lot of things before she'd passed.
Well, I think that's what's interesting about this and the impetus of this podcast of why you're coming out in this last year or so now
Mhm.
telling the real story. Because a lot of people are probably, even the naysayers and the people out there are probably, no, I'm DB Cooper. Like, well, you need to hold on, boss, because you're about to get stumped. Because of the evidence, the actual evidence that we now currently have. It's not just letters. It's not just hearsay. It's not your childhood stories, but we have actual evidence
Yeah.
of why your dad was DB Cooper.
Yeah.
You want to talk about some of that evidence?
So, we'll start with the parachute. When I got that, I actually held on it for a little bit, but, I'd somebody had reached out to me. It was like a local news station to Cove City, North Carolina, New Bern area, if anybody's familiar with North Carolina, and said, "Hey, want to interview you?" And I was like, "I'll be down there." And I said, "Hey, I have all this stuff." And he literally said, "Do you mind if I have a friend in the FBI." I was like, "I don't care." So I didn't contact the FBI. It kind of happened that way. I didn't think about it. Just went about my life. And then one day the FBI called me and said, "Hey, do you have this stuff?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And like, "Can we look at it?" And, I was like, "Yeah." And so we set up they actually drove there. It was a North Carolina FBI, I don't know, if
Field
attach or
field
field,
officer.
field office, that's
Yeah.
it. And they drove up to, Richmond, and we met at a friend's office, and I actually got a lawyer and everything there as well, because and they
Smart.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I'll tell you what they have. They have what'd you call it?
The
The
container.
the
Yeah,
container.
Clarkson container.
There is also um, I guess you would call it the parachute or the canopy that we think or could be part of that. There's jump logs, not just jump logs of my dad, and I'll go into that real quick. On his jump log, uh, date-wise, time-wise, I wanna say there was 7, 8, jumps right before November, the DB Cooper jump, and literally, like, a week or 2, like, a bunch of jumps, like, a week or 2 up to it, and then nothing, and then a week before the Johnson jump in April, 1, and then there was that
So those are his practice
practice
jumps.
jumps, and
Okay.
then, of course,
And Johnson, so everybody knows, was his alias that he used to get on the plane that second
the
time.
second jump.
Okay. Got it.
Correct. So, so they wanted that. Let me think, is there is anything else they took? Well, besides my DNA. So
Of course. Yeah.
so, the story is after they got all that, evidence, and just so you guys know, and like I think I told you in 2017, they said they weren't gonna open it up because of the parachute. They have now reopened, and then they call me up and say, "Hey, can we come and look at the building that the stuff was found and just kind of go through it. And I didn't think anything of it, but I said, yeah, but I need to be there. So we set a date, I don't know, a couple weeks ahead. And the reason it's kind of funny, or I had no idea that it was going to be a show. So I assumed it was just going to be the two field agents I met with a few months earlier or a month earlier and whatever. Or and I think they told me they were going to bring a photographer. So I think it was 10 a.m. in the morning. I got there because it's like a 3 hour drive for me. I got there probably 20 minutes earlier and I'm just sitting in the front yard and I don't hear anything. I just look up because they're a little bit late. And I look up and I just see all these blacked out cars pulling up. I almost ran. I don't know why that was my first instinct because I just wasn't ready for it.
Your genetic.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I had to tell myself I haven't done anything. And they this part. In fact, what was funny is one of the FBI agents I knew when I started walking out to him. He's like, "Don't worry." He kind of like I think he understood what it looked like and kind of tried to immediately calm me down. That no, it's okay. So it was FBI agents, but I guess it was because they thought it was a big deal. Uh,
Yeah.
Local sheriff, game wardens, you name it. Anybody from that area in law enforcement decided to show up
Mm.
to the unveiling of I mean, and they did take pictures of stuff that I hadn't taken and was my dad's, but they spent, goodness, 3, maybe 2 hours of just taking photographs. It was very interesting how detailed they were with taking photos of that place, actually. And during that, one of the FBI agents came up to me and was like, "Do you really want this solved?" And I was like, "Oh, of course, I'm just," and they're like, "Give us your DNA." And I was like, "Hold up." So I wasn't quick to give it. Literally just, asked for a minute, and I just played out. I was like, they probably have my DNA somewhere, or if they wanted, they really could get it.
Yeah.
So
Most Americans already have their DNA.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, on the spot, I let them take DNA swab. And then like 5 minutes later, said, "Can we take another swab just in case?" I'm like, "Sure." So they took. I mean, not that that mattered at that point, but they did do that. And then I through contact because here's where everybody's. I'm like, did the DNA come out? But and they're like, well, nothing's conclusive. And this is where a lot of people get this twisted. And I don't understand enough about DNA. I don't know where their DNA sample came from. And there's a lot of in the DB Cooper world. There was a tie that was left, and that they say is DB Cooper's, and there's a clasp or pin. They say there should be DNA on that. But when I talked to the agents, they're again, I'm probably going to get this wrong on DNA. That they said they only had 7 strands section of it's a partial DNA sample with only 7 out of 23 markers. I think that's what it was,
Mm.
and that it could it could be a false positive or a false negative or wouldn't be conclusive. Essentially, what they said, and then they said they wanted to get my sisters, which they haven't yet, and then they asked me if they could dig up my dad, and I have not given them permission for that.
Mm.
And that's kind of where we're at now. I'm just not.
So your DNA is supposed to potentially tie.
But they
rest of
told me that
23.
it didn't come up, so I did give them, and they did come back and say it's just so inconclusive, and they should have told me this before. They said we knew that coming in that there was a good chance it wouldn't pop, even if it was positive because of the sample, the partial sample that we have.
So they're asking to dig up your dad's grave to get a DNA sample, a
Yeah.
modern one with the technology we have today, which means to me, just hearing all this, because all the evidence and calls and people that have called in over the years have been kind of like, nope, case solved, case solved, case solved. All of a sudden, it's like, wait, what? You have the parachute? Okay, let's check it out. Then they check it out. And typically they're like, here's your parachute back. It's not conclusive.
Right.
Instead, the entourage shows up. They do this whole thing. DNA test you, and now they're willing to dig up your dad's grave to
Correct.
confirm that, that means that there's substantial evidence that
Yeah.
you've sent.
Yeah.
In most opinions, and I've even talked to some FBI agents about this, and they're like, "Yeah, dude, that sounds like it's rolling." So,
Yeah, and, I don't know how I feel about that. I know dad's dead. It's a my sister is actually different, like
if they come back and say, "Hey, we have to do that,"
well, they don't
order to
they
solve
told
it.
me they that's they told me they wouldn't do it without my permissions. I don't know if that's because it's not an active case.
Right.
It's not a I think they do need my permission.
'Cause they're at 50 years later, they're asking, "Do you really want this solved now? If so, we may have to do this." So if
Right.
that question comes down to the final draw of what you should do, do you want it solved that bad to say, "Yeah,
Right.
go ahead and do it," or just a skin suit and a box at this point? His soul's up there laughing at us right now?
Yeah. Sister, just so you know, I told you we feel differently. She's like, "What's the matter with you? Just tell me yes." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't look at it that way." I mean,
That's hard. That'd be hard. I just lost my dad last year, and I don't that would be
yeah,
it's tough, man.
yeah, it's just, it is, as you said, it is what it is, but seems very, I don't know what the word would be, but yeah, just, desecrating my dad's grave just doesn't sound, yeah.
By the FBI.
And then by the people that, yeah, so,
There's some good let me get this straight. There's some good dudes in the FBI. I have a lot of friends. My brother is an FBI agent. Um, but the organization could use an overhaul. I think everybody would agree.
I think
So
everybody
that's
agree.
that's what you're concerned about, I would imagine. But,
Yeah.
um,
So, and we'll see where I mean, even right as we speak now, I'm not going to say definitively no or definitively yes. It's it
yeah.
might be that, and well, let me go at why that's even a thing. So I've talked to the FBI. They have a description of the parachute. If that's it, they've sent it. Last time I talked, they're the parachutes with a expert, whatever that the FBI. I don't know if it was a um, expert parachutist outside the FBI or what exactly that meant. But we have to take in consideration when they're using the description from the rigger, and this thing is full of serial numbers all over it. They did not take them down.
In the beginning, you're talking
Yeah, in the beginning, so they don't
50
have this
years.
information. They don't have because it would be a slam dunk because there's marks all over this thing, identifying marks all over this.
And let's establish that part of the story real quick so people understand. Like, so we're looking back all the way to Washington State when he did the first job,
Correct.
the DB Cooper job.
Right.
When he does his ransom, he asks for the 2 parachutes, main, 2 fronts, 2 backs. He gets those from Earl.
Cossey, who is a rigger at, can't remember,
Yeah, that's a weird
weird name.
native Washington name. I forget the name of the drop zone. He gives him those parachutes, and the parachutes were highly modified. And
One of
Earl,
them was, which is the one that he jumped with.
yeah, and that modification is what kind of triggered me looking into this.
I wouldn't have, like, I just want, I have not gone through a lot of my grandmother's stuff to this day. I would have never have went through this stuff down in North Carolina. My grandmother had a lot of stuff. I'm still going through it. I'm not saying I never. And to be honest, if I'd have looked at it, I wouldn't have known what I was looking at, and I might have thrown it away. So,
So yeah, most people would. You're lucky if we found that. I mean, it's
yeah.
because the modifications on it that Earl did. He was a people. Is he still alive?
No, he was
dead, right?
murdered.
That's right. He was murdered in 2013.
Yeah, yeah.
which is apparently not a part of the DB
According,
Cooper.
according to Dan, it's
not
not
a
a part, but oddly enough, unsolved murder.
Right. Again, another weird unsolved. But he did such modifications on this parachute, which was an NB-8 military emergency parachute. So if you guys are static line jumpers, Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, or you've been on free fall missions, a lot of the air crew will wear that old style NB-8, emergency system, like the guys checking the doors. And then this one was highly modified because that parachute was not designed to do static or free fall operations on. In this case, kind of free fall. So he modified that container in the harness, and he put the um, I won't use all no, people won't even understand the nomenclature of some of the things, but these quick disconnect systems that you'll see on standard static line parachutes or free fall parachutes, the NBA did not have those. It was slick sewn in risers. But Earl modified those to where you could now cut away a main parachute and if it was bad and then deploy a reserve. He also moved the deployment handle for the main parachute from left side, which the MB8's always had, because I've worn them on static line jump master missions. And then he modified that cable assembly over to the right side, which is typical for skydiving, and a bunch of other weird modifications that I'm still trying to figure out.
Yeah,
And then
there's a
so the thing that I think that makes this evidence very clear is that that is the parachute by Earl that was given to the FBI that night 53 years ago and was found with those exact modifications in North Carolina.
and my grandmother's belongings.
That's a one of a kind. There's nobody else that would modify an MB8 like that back then. And if so, it was like probably a word of mouth, very rare system, in my opinion. Looking back, and I've been skydiving since '95 and been pretty big into it, and self-taught on the parachute rigging side, and that just didn't make sense. So that's where I look at that, and even the FBI is like, yeah, this is the thing.
They opened the case. They reopened the case with it. So
Yeah, that's a
mean,
big deal.
yeah. So
So where does that go from now? Do you know? Did they tell you anything? What happens with
Well,
Euro? You're going to get the rigs back, or
I mean, yeah, I signed evidence sheet or
Custody.
a custody sheet, and they said I'd get it back. And I'm obviously hoping to get it back because outside of everything, yeah,
Well, we'll hold the FBI accountable, so they don't need to hold on to that forever.
it's
Appreciate it.
yeah.
Cool, man.
Uh, they did tell me, and then the last time I talked to them, it totally makes sense. Essentially, this is a cold case, old case, and the world's on fire. we're we have a lot of stuff that's priority, and we can't put priority on this. So they're slow rolling it because,
Sure. Yeah.
but on the flip side, they also, I mean, literally told me we'd love to have a win because we don't take up very many of those lately. So
Yeah, I know, looking into researching and talking to agents that are on very unique cases that are colder, or there's still a case officer on each case,
right,
whether they get active calls or not. And so I think this case, up until when did they close it? 2017.
17, I think.
You've always had an agent on the case,
Right.
and so if anybody gets a tip, call in, whatever. So everybody understands how that works. It just might be one of your cases in the pile. No, I got a call on DB Cooper case. What's up? I found $500,000 in cash. No, you didn't. We already found that. Goodbye. And then this one all of a sudden is like, whoa, holy shit! This might actually come out and be finally. We might actually solve this after 53 years. I think that is a big win.
Yeah.
For them.
And I haven't. I have a agent that I have a direct call to or a line to. I don't know if I don't know if they assigned somebody. I don't know. I know I have somebody that I talk to.
They would probably have an active, if they've reactivated, I'd assume they would put it on somebody's desk and they'd be now in charge of that.
Okay.
They'd have to have somebody in charge of that.
I guess so. Yeah. I just haven't been told that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd text her every day.
Because I don't know why I feel like I'm bothering her, but
Just share me your contact. I'll take care of it. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. I'm not getting myself involved anymore.
it's funny.
Than I already am. Okay. So we're just waiting now to see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They have everything. Again, that's the last time I've talked, which has been quite a few months now. I was just pretty much told that it's not a priority. We're definitely on it, and I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I'm think my sister's still waiting to give DNA. So,
Okay.
and obviously my dad maybe being dug up is a possibility. Because I just preferred them close it without that. I don't know if that happens or not. And it really, for people that are into the DBQ, because everybody likes to go to the DNA, and that would obviously be a slam dunk.
The DNA.
The DNA. Okay, let's put this in perspective. DNA was not a thing in the 70s.
Right.
So there was a couple things, and this could be incompetence or whatever you want to call it with the FBI. But one thing, there was cigarette butts, and that which they lost. There was a lot of, and
Oh, really?
through time, because it wasn't DNA, there are pictures of FBI just passing around that tie, like just holding it without.
Oh, so you got contamination.
Oh,
That's
all over,
crazy.
all like, oh, crazy. Yeah.
That's probably why they're getting parcels.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just,
I'm no evidence expert, but
but that's exactly what happened because that tie is, if you follow DB Cooper, is kind of like that was the evidence. So for years, people just passed it around. Look, they were holding it, doing photo ops with it. That was just a thing.
do we know why he left that on a plane?
No, no clue.
Because left the magazine on the plane too, had a fingerprint on it apparently.
A partial, I think. And then,
Partial.
yeah, and I don't think they did anything with that either.
That's weird because if you got a print and you got a guy, why wouldn't you? Just common sense, in my
Yeah.
opinion. But maybe there was something that was
Yeah, I don't remember
getting
what
lost.
happened with. Or they had some stuff and they didn't take fingerprints. I think that was there was a lot of incompetence that happened immediately. And to the, not defense, they didn't know what the hell had just happened. Like why they didn't get, when they, even with the parachutes, they had never been asked for parachutes before.
Yeah.
They didn't.
Probably didn't think to write serial numbers down
Yeah.
in parachutes. They
Yeah.
they did on all the money, of course.
Yeah, they had the money.
Yeah.
But
But those modifications are kind of a signature serial almost. You know what I mean? That Earl did to
right.
that parachute.
Yeah, it would have been real easy. And like I said, it'd be super, because the one thing again, they said two things: money or the parachute. If you had money, you'd have serial numbers. The parachute has serial numbers all over it. They just did not write it down. Like that was,
Well, it seemed to be pretty
They're bad.
quick because that by the time Earl got the rigs to, I think, the Coast Guard, they flew it to the airport.
I
And then,
think they came in a taxi or something. It was like a weird.
yeah, I heard there was one report I read that the Coast Guard had to fly it from that location, get it to another location, then they drove it.
Went to the wrong airport first. That's why.
Okay.
I think there's two airports. They went there and then had to get, in the course time.
Yeah.
It
And
was a
probably
hun-
getting it to the plane and not just oversight on that. Well, let's go back. Let's go back a little bit to talk about the first jump. And maybe where he gets back from Vietnam, he's at BYU, he's flying the National Guard. Because I heard there's a story where he was actually flying for one of the search and rescue, or not search and rescue, but the manhunt.
The manhunt. Yeah.
Let's go back to his. Why would you think that he would all of a sudden go from this life of service and sense of duty, to all of a sudden I'm going to get into a life of crime? What do you think? What happened there?
Obviously not just think, my mother was very definitive of, he felt very betrayed by our government after, as you said, lots of service, giving himself.
Coming home from Vietnam in the 70s was not an easy thing to do.
No.
Either.
No, back then, lots of, my mother would tell me stories about how he would have to change his uniform flying over here because he'd get spit on in airports, which is wild to think that that would be okay. But, yeah, I don't think Vietnam vets were treated well by the public, and oddly enough, weren't treated very well by our own government. And, back then also, PTSD or any mental health or
Wasn't talked about much.
what not only talked about it, it didn't exist in their minds, right? It was just suck it up, go back to life. And obviously Vietnam was, I don't know. We've kind of gone into some of the stuff he's done, when some of the awards has, but I don't think that, I think that changed him, who he fundamentally, that's not just my dad. I think anybody that goes to war does. And I think without it, I think he had a hard time adjusting. I really do. And my mother said that too. My mother, obviously, I think she married him 65, had my sister in 66. So, she knew him essentially during the tours.
Yeah.
And, according to her, he was different. And when he came back, he had aspirations and dreams. And he literally went to the VA and said, "Hey, I have these migraines that I guess were really crippling, like to the point, like my mom said he would start hitting his head up against the wall." hard to try to, I guess that was better than the migraines.
Was he diagnosed with anything? Agent Orange?
I mean, he had been exposed to Agent Orange. That was the theory,
Okay.
was Agent Orange. But the problem was when he asked for help, all they said, we're going to take away your pilot's license.
Mm.
And I think that snapped him.
Yeah, his biggest passion.
His biggest passion, his dream was when we talk about law enforcement, it wasn't just, I'm going to be a street beat. He wanted to be a helicopter pilot for law enforcement. So it was very specific to what he wanted to do in law enforcement, was be a helicopter pilot. So
yeah, I've been hearing some studies and research on, I study warrior history as far back as I can, thousands of years, and just try to study different tribes and different militaries from around the world and different just people. And it's like, I've gotten a lot of questions lately, like, why would you let your son join the military? And like, because if it's a messed up system, the best thing to do is to put good people into it. And then of course, good people can get corrupted and or like in your dad's case, pissed off when they're not helping when you're supposed to help me. And you're still going to fight. The warrior's always going to fight. Like if you didn't find martial arts, if you didn't find this life of fighting, what the hell would you be?
I have no idea.
I was not a good kid growing up, man.
Yeah.
And the military certainly saved me with a very fortunate opportunity to still join the military. It's all I ever wanted to do since I was 9 years old, was jump out of airplanes and kill the bad guy, And then you get out there and you start doing it and you start to realize the reality of war. You start to realize, everybody always has this promise of liberty and freedom, the promise of this land, right? But nobody ever really sees the horrors of freedom. And so when you see that, especially as I think what he did in MACV-SOG in Vietnam, and having all these dark operations moments, a lot of death, a lot of destruction. If you read some of the MACV-SOG stories, books, and hear from guys, it was savage. And so when you get out, you want to still have that sense of duty, that sense of protection, which is a very powerful thing until somebody goes, yeah, you can't do that anymore. And so what's your purpose? Your purpose is still fighting. Your purpose is still the action. And so you have to fill that somehow, some way. And I think some people go to that life. You're going to screw me after I've done nothing but put my foot to ass for my country all my life. Well, then switch. Could be. I mean, just,
No, and because there's a lot of stories, and I can remember them, and we can go through them, that my dad was very, we'll just say, adrenaline junkie. And pushed the bounds a lot in his whole life, like from a kid. Like he just was that guy. He didn't have a lot. He did not have the fear genetic. But he had never been he was that, I guess, on the good guy side, if you say. He just never, but he had no fear. So he did a lot of things that were, I don't know, crazy, or people would look and, he was really big into motorcycles, as I hear. And like his favorite thing to do was to go 120 miles an hour down a 2-lane in traffic so he could just barely miss the cars on each side as fast as he could go.
That is and I've becoming a post-traumatic growth coach in the past 5 to 10 years now, studying it and diving into it, helping a lot of guys. Sometimes that is your meditation when you need to go fast. Now I'm not saying it's a good thing, because I'm not going to get into the adrenaline cortisol roller coaster that it puts us on.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you need that juice, you got to find the action. And I know I'm certainly guilty of that, being an extreme athlete, fighting, I nonstop need something. And I think that's the problem is, since Vietnam on, we've had this culture of warrior class that does not know how to off gas. We don't know how to balance our lives. We've lost touch with our true innate warrior self, right? And everybody will say, well, just suck it up, Buttercup, stop being a pussy. It's like, no, if you study some of the greatest warriors on the face of the planet, most of them were gardeners, they were, musicians, they were, the samurai. Look at that life. You had to be the monk before you could be the warrior.
Yep.
And if you weren't a warrior. You were outcast. You were excommunicated immediately. If you killed somebody as a samurai, you were excommunicated. If you could not justify the act.
Right.
Especially if you started it, you were excommunicated. So you never go for a fight. And that's why I love that old quote where it's like, if you're going to threaten a man, if you threaten a man, it's worth killing a man. So keep your tongue, just like your sword, prudently sheathed until it's time to cut a man down. We've lost the balance of that. Everybody just wants to cut people down nowadays. And so
There's
then we
no
got to
need.
keep cutting it down and keep cutting it down. Next thing you know, we're skyjacking 727s or whatever, or losing our shit or drinking and drugging ourselves into an oblivion. And then, so I think that's one of the big things that I've taken on is how do we get those guys now that feel that way and say, no, you still have a purpose. You can still serve in that sense of duty for good. So let your compassionate warrior, your compassionate savage or psychopath, which is a whole other study I'm not going to get into, let that be for a super sense of justice. And reading his stories, I clearly feel he had that. I mean, his military history. I mean, even the stuff you brought today, I want to show it real quick. Like this is just absolutely rad, man. This is your father's actual Green Beret from Vietnam. Everybody goes, oh, he's 5th Special Forces Group. Oh, 19th Group. Well, he was 5th and 19th Group. Okay. And it's got his name in here. And we'll show some close-ups of this. And the date is very interesting, 1963. Now, if you're a GB guy, you're a Green Beret out there, feel free to let us know. Keep feeding us information. I'm a Marine, man. I know a bunch of GBs, but 1963, I would assume, as well as some of my guys here that are phenomenal historians, that 1963, this was probably one of the first 100 Green Berets. Okay?
Yeah.
That's badass. And also in that time frame, when you went to Vietnam, and then there's a couple other things here. We've got this, I saw his French formulae I don't speak very much French, but we've got Marine units that run this and a couple Army divisions that have this. And of course, back in 1963, 64, during the advisory missions in Vietnam, because of the conflict in the French Vietnam timeframe there, that's why he was given this. And if he wasn't probably on Mac V SOG, probably wouldn't have got this, especially with some of his other decorations and badges that he has here. You brought this little box of medals, and I kind of put it into a, if you can see that or not. But he's got a CIB, which is also, according to Seth, one of our guys here, how it ties into his Mac V SOG time frame because of the way his CIB is. Here's his warrant officer ranks when he went to flight school. You can see a Special Forces badge, and is also, everybody said, oh, he's an airborne guy, went to jump school. But what you also don't see in his military records that you have is he has his South Vietnamese airborne wings. That's these down here below. And again, if you're operating in Vietnam, jumping with the Vietnamese, it's all tying together to Mac V SOG. So just really, really cool history, man, that you actually have all this stuff. I don't have any of my dad's stuff, or my grandfather's stuff. But I have records of it. But to see and feel, what he had and what he wore on his uniform is just absolutely, absolutely really cool. So I think
Grandma.
thanks, Grandma. So diving into that history of Mac V SOG and knowing what those guys did, that kind of shows what kind of character he was. And then to go back to Vietnam as a helicopter pilot, there's a high probability people have told me that he may have been flying for Mac V SOG as well, because he's a Special Forces guy. What better pilot would you want to have with you? In my opinion, if you could actually put that person in the perfect place, I'd want an SF dude flying me. That's a badass pilot. And of course, his air medals kind of show that dude's a badass. Flying in times that nobody else would fly. So yeah, he always definitely wanted the juice, but I think it's an art form, right? For me, like skydiving, it's an art. It's not an adrenaline sport. Fighting, it's an art. It's not an adrenaline. It is when it starts out, but then you start to see that art form show itself, and I think that's where you continually need something like that in your life. And he just switched it to crime in this case because of the VA screwing him, taking his helicopter.
Obviously, there was some greed there. I mean, obviously, he wanted the money.
Sure. Not the way that he was a criminal, but right, it's a pretty cool way to go.
So I don't know if he thought it was cool. I mean, I don't. I think he thought he had a set of skills.
Yeah.
and he did, that
I
he
don't
could
think anybody would just say, "You know what? I think I'm gonna go skyjack a plane." That's a skill set. Like, that's and then you go into all the stuff that he did, and how he accomplished that. Even though some people are like, "Oh, he's a little sloppy here, a little sloppy there." Sometimes sloppiness is also a signature of a professional.
huh. Yeah, I mean,
Cover for action, there's a cover for status, there's a cover for cover, and I see looking through the story that he did all those very, very well. Especially the prison stuff, that was cool.
yeah, as you brought up, he escaped twice. One time he got caught, and that was in transportation, and I didn't talk to you about this, like, and my mother said they beat the shit out of him. Like, when they caught him, they
And that's when they initially arrested him and transported him.
he'd been convicted of sky piracy at this time, and they were
Okay.
transporting him, I'm gonna assume, from Salt Lake to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary.
And he escaped along the way.
He escaped. They stopped, overnight at a, smaller jail, and all he did, they put him in a drunk tank, and in the morning, they called the guy up to, for his whatever, to get released, and the guy was passed out. My dad said, "Yep, that's me."
He faked being the passed out dude, the drunk guy?
Yeah.
And he walked right out of the prison.
Well, he said I had
Jail.
well, he was supposed to go in front of the judge. He told the, bailiff or the sheriff, "I gotta go to the bathroom," and he bounced out the window.
Which again, I look at that and go, okay, my first thought is, well, what's the best time? And if you're a school guy, you know what I'm talking about here. What's the best time to escape? Right away.
Right
Right,
away.
when things are still confusing, especially when things are in transit, that's one of the big things they'll teach you fundamentally. When things are still chaotic, you want to get the hell away. You don't wanna wait until you get into this maximum security prison, which still didn't stop him down the road. So I think that was his skill sets that he learned and probably his innate self going, "I need to bounce right now." And
Yeah.
that's clever, you
A
know?
a odd story, and I don't know if this is telling of who he was, or I think he was upset, but when he was sentenced, he looked at the judge and said, "You'll never keep me there."
And
Very
what'd the judge say?
defiantly, and I guess arrogantly, he says, "Yeah, right. You're definitely gonna be serving your time." He's like, "You're not gonna keep me."
Yeah, you're not getting out of Lewisburg
Federal penitentiary.
Penitentiary because nobody's ever escaped Lewisburg Penitentiary except your dad.
Correct.
Yeah. So then they capture him, they beat the shit out of him, like, right away? Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
what happened?
it was pretty instantaneous, yeah.
Okay, so then they get him on the road again, he gets to Lewisburg, and
I
then
think it was a small town, middle, like, he was on foot in a jumpsuit. Like,
yeah,
it's
it's
like,
hard to
it wasn't anyway, I don't know what he was thinking, but, I mean, he was just trying to get away, but he's
acting, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so then he gets in and he spends how long in the pen?
So, it was just a couple years,
Okay.
and it was I mean, you wanna go into that story, how it was planned, and it
Yeah,
was
I think that'd be fun
yeah,
because
because it was
the
planned from, I think, day 1, and by that I don't think day 1, I'm sure he had to adjust and get into a routine, but he did a very odd thing is he exercised every day. Not that that's odd, but what he did was there was a rule in the yard, and I don't know what the exact measurement was, but you had to keep, we'll call it 50 feet from the fence line. And over a 2-year period, he would move a foot closer, and he did this every day, like clockwork. Every day, same time, same group of people, and he did this, and eventually, over that 2 years, the guards got used to him running on the fence line.
'cause they don't even know that there's been a difference because he took
I
the
think they just
long
got
game.
used to it. No, I think they noticed, but they just got used to they just
But 2 years, that's a lot of time for little bits of movement, and
very little bit.
that's brilliant. I mean, that's also there's some things taught with that type of mindset, and going back to the mindset, you said it earlier, I forget how you said his mindset, meaning that he said, "You're not gonna keep me," right, to
Right.
the judge. You said his mindset was what? Like, he'll never surrender or something like that? What was that? Like, jail's not an option or something ever?
We talked earlier, no, I thought you were talking about right now. No, my mother said that when he did the crime, that he never considered jail as a consequence. which I've always you explained that mindset to me actually, because to me, there's options there. Obviously, not getting caught was, I think, where he was going with this, but his other option was being killed. He's either gonna make it
Or
or
get
not,
killed.
or
Yeah.
or get killed.
It's typical operator mentality, you know?
So, that's why we've had this conversation.
Capture is never an option. If it's not just
Not an option.
immediately, and I try to die doing it if I have to or get away. There's no I'm not going into confinement.
Yeah, so
If I do, I still have other options that I'm trained in, and I might instinctually, innately know, but, yeah, that his mindset. I can see that absolutely.
I always you explained it better to me. I was like, "Yeah, that makes sense," because I always thought that was interesting. My mother was very like, "Your dad never thought he was going to prison." I was like, "Well, how's that?" Like, he committed a crime, and it now makes sense. So, obviously, he did go to prison, and
Well, it's like being in Vietnam and planning for a mission and go, "Okay, guys, once we get captured, if we're in prison, this is what we're gonna do next." They're like, "No, that's not gonna happen." And if
right,
it does, that's what our other training's for. And that's a whole different world. And we'll continue to escape, you know? Um, yeah, it's like if you have a guy in captivity, especially a special operations guy, and he's not doing anything actively to try to escape, I think, and this isn't a you know, an absolute I'm saying, but the mentality of most guys that I know be like, I would always be actively trying to escape because that's what I'm supposed to do, number 1, because I'm not supposed to be here because if I'm here, I feel personally that I'm ashamed because I failed my mission in some way, shape, or form. So then I will not fail if I escape or die. So I think that's his mentality even going into skyjacking an airplane. Like,
yeah,
I'm not going to prison because that he's coming fresh out of Vietnam where he's dealing with that extreme possibility, almost a certainty that in most missions you can get captured and put into, you know, nobody wants to go to the Hanoi Hilton, and that's
no,
what's in his mind. So
yeah, so when he so timing of his escape and when he escaped, he, essentially had one last appeal, and that appeal was denied with another week or 2 before he escaped. So, he had it
so he had
planned.
it planned,
Yeah, oh, yeah,
which
100%.
especially with the 2 years of moving the perimeter
Mhm,
out.
and my mother was also very complicit in that, or compliant in that because, essentially, this was told to me by my grandmother, that my mom would essentially get maps and of Lewisburg and the surrounding areas, memorize them, get pencil and paper inside, draw out the maps, and then destroy it inside.
That's what mom said.
No, that's what my grandmother said,
Grandma
but that's
said,
what my mom did for my
yeah,
like, my mother also helped by if you could help, that's how my mother helped him escape, was she
okay.
essentially gave him the lay of the land, and, on that, just another story about who my dad was, when they did escape, they went to a house, and there was an elderly couple in there, and this is, they tied up the elderly couple, and they took the car, and I guess when they did this, obviously a terrible thing, but it was an elderly couple, and I guess the man had heart condition or whatever, and the rest of the guys and then we can go in the were ready to go, and my dad wouldn't leave until he made sure they were taken care of, got their medicine, and, you know, essentially, when the cops came and got him, they were like, "This guy was so nice, wanted to make sure that we were okay." The rest of them didn't give a shit about us, but my dad wanted to make sure that they were taken care of, they weren't harmed, and got their medicine before they took off.
Yeah.
So, he took the time even while they were on the run right away after they escaped to make sure they were okay.
Go back to the prison. We know the perimeter,
Okay.
but how does he get out?
Okay. Yeah, I'll jump all over the place 'cause
No,
there's
it's
a lot to
great.
the story.
Yeah.
So, during this time, and he had made a friend, and this is the Jimmy Hoffa connection. So, let me I'll jump all over the place. So, in, I'll say 2021, somehow my sister found this guy that served with my father in prison. I served in prison, and he wanted to meet us. So, it was on the North Carolina line near Virginia, and we went and met him, and he's like, "I wanted to meet your dad so bad when he came there because I was the only person in that prison that was Mormon, LDS. And also, we hadn't talked about this. My dad got excommunicated from the church, which he actually said was the worst punishment he got. So it hurt him pretty bad. But
because of his criminal act, he was
Right.
excommunicated from the
But
church.
one of the reasons was, and one reason I have a problem with the Mormon church, outside of a few things, but they were embarrassed. And I think in like headlines and stuff like that, they called him the Mormon hijacker. And they didn't like that, obviously, for obvious reasons.
So he's a Jack Mormon.
He was actually a practicing Mormon. I'm pretty sure he went to church after the hijacking Mormon. Yeah, I think at some point he was a bishop.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was.
Okay.
Yeah, he was very, very, very devout Mormon. The dichotomy, it's very interesting. But I mean,
So this friend was the Mormon and
Mormon in prison,
built a connection. Okay.
and he said he couldn't wait for him, and he said, he obviously told me how much he loved my dad, and what a great guy my dad was. He said that there's only two people in prison that I was close with, and it was your dad, and Jimmy Hoffa. He said, and Jimmy Hoffa got,
Oh my gosh, this is getting better
I know, odd. He said Jimmy Hoffa really stayed to himself, but for whatever reason, he befriended me for the short time he was there. And I guess Jimmy Hoffa got released by Nixon like right before my dad got there. So there was that connection. He was like, yeah, the only two people I really liked in prison was Jimmy Hoffa and your dad.
Wow.
But so back to the story, he worked in the dental department. And so prisons have dental department, so you can obviously have to go to doctors and dentists, and as an assistant, and he had access to dental paste, you'd make like the molds of your teeth and stuff like that. So it's like plaster of Paris or whatever. And my dad got that and molded a gun, obviously not a real gun, out of dental paste, and he used that in the escape. So what he did was that day, he did his regular run, and when he got near, he also did it timing wise. He knew when the garbage truck came once a week, and he did his run around that time. And what he did is essentially hijacked the garbage truck with the gun made out of dental paste, got in and then used the garbage truck because they're very solid, and ran the gate and busted out.
So they rammed the gate and hauled ass.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've actually oddly been to Lewisburg as an adult. I think I told you this story that somebody in martial arts was part of the SORT team at Lewisburg and was one of the head guys of the SORT team in Lewisburg. And like, hey, I come up to and I told him who my dad was. And he's like, come up here. And like, he's like, your dad is part of our training, like a big part. Like your dad's super famous up here because, especially with the SORT team and people, the guards, because he's the guy that came from here.
The only guy.
Only guy to
So I'm sure they still talk about it to this day.
Yeah, yeah. He changed. I mean, he's one of the reasons we go through metal detectors in airports, and he's, I guess, in prisons, they have a hold time in every prison in the country now for garbage trucks, so like 70 or like 24 to 72 hours. That garbage trucks now have to be separately contained, held, and then
Inspected.
yeah, before it comes to another container and then out. Yeah.
I'm curious. This dental gun. What happened to that?
So, unfortunately, because it would be a very cool artifact. I guess during he dropped it and it broke, but they already got in the truck.
Okay.
And it obviously realized right then that it wasn't real when it fell and broke, but they were and they were fired upon.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
But it was a garbage truck, and
because being an explosives guy, he's probably good at. I mean, I go back to my personal experience of shaping, and I sculpt from clay, and I used to build products like that. That's how I started because I didn't have all the resources I needed, machinery and CAD and 3D printers. And I would sculpt plastic explosives, or we'd sculpt data sheets and make things. So maybe that's where his brain was going. And so
I mean, he
put two and two together and goes, okay, I can make a gun, but it's got to be realistic looking too. So I'm curious. They probably were running 1911s back then.
Yeah,
Every fall.
I've never heard. Well, I'm pretty sure I know it was a handgun,
Yeah.
and
I don't know. I nerd out on this stuff.
I I don't know. I heard it was painted. I don't know exactly where he got the paint. Haven't heard that story.
One of the workshops.
Yeah,
they were
probably.
painting,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and until he dropped it and it broke, they believed it was real.
All right. So we bust out. Let's go. Let's move down the line because this is where it starts getting interesting too with the bureau. Um, what's the timeline from he escapes to where does he go and what happens next?
So immediately he goes to the farm in North Carolina.
Okay.
On the way, they rob a bank.
Just on the way.
On the way, well, it's funny. It was a cousin.
Gosh.
It was near North, and that's how they knew they were at the farm. And I got some odd stories there. But when obviously the police could show up there, and it was actually one of my dad's cousins that he robbed. He was like, "Oh yeah," they were like, "Yeah, he wasn't going to hurt us." So,
Okay.
so they knew they were there, and here's this. I think it's a fucked up story of the FBI. Was that so I don't know how many FBI agents, they essentially trapped my dad on the farm. They had the farm surrounded.
How long later after the escape?
I want to say a day,
It
not
was
the same
quick.
day. Yeah,
Quick,
they
okay.
drove.
So they're on him pretty quick.
Oh yeah, well,
Bank robbery, I did
yeah, the
call.
bank robbery did not pretty much module. I don't know if they thought that one through of yeah,
Well, you didn't have an ATM machine or so. What are you gonna do?
but of where he did it. Like he did it literally went home and robbed a bank.
Okay.
So, and it was, I think it was New Bern, so, 20 miles away, but not close enough to home. Definitely not Pennsylvania. So, they go to the farm, they get us surrounded. My dad's there, and he escaped with a total of 4, including himself. They split up. Immediately, they catch 2 of them. And then left is Melvin Walker and my dad. And Melvin Walker, we'll get into him, was a famous bank robber and was serving a life sentence for a bank robbery. So bank robbing
Natural.
banks kind of made probably sense to him because we had a very famous bank robber robbing banks with my dad. So the story is this is wild that they got my sister and they put her on my sister. How old was she then? Gosh, 8. And made her, like, get on a megaphone, and she was just crying, "Daddy, they're gonna kill you, they're just," and they were making her 'cause my mother wasn't there yet. We just got off the bus and just snatched her up and was having my sister on a megaphone begging for my dad to come out,
Wow.
and they're like, "We're gonna kill him, tell him we're gonna kill him." "The daddy, we're gonna," yeah, this is the FBI. And then I'll tell you what was me and my mother have a lot of issues, and she's passed now. One of the coolest things my mother did was at that moment. And by that, I guess my mother was at work. Somebody calls her and tells her what's going on. I don't know, because I know she was involved with the escape. I don't know if she knew the timing. But anyway, she pulls in there and saw what is happening. And there was quite a few witnesses. She walked up to the head FBI and slapped the shit out of him. Like open-handed and went off on him. They had to pull her off him. So,
Wow.
yeah, because we had my sister there just in tears.
Yeah, I would have done the same thing. Yeah, without my permission, or I would.
Yeah, I said,
I wouldn't let that happen anyways. I would never.
have you imagined?
Yeah.
Could you imagine that happening? That happened. And my mom, yeah, didn't appreciate it much.
Well, good for her.
And
Yeah,
that moment,
because
my
that's
mother's,
child trauma that you live with for the rest of your
yeah,
life,
but
which
that moment,
varies.
well,
That's just not okay in my book. No matter what the circumstances, you should never have to put a child into it like that.
that moment, there's a lot of this. That FBI looked at him and said, "We're gonna kill that motherfucker on sight." And that was the theme the whole time.
Oh, the agents have said that out loud on
Oh,
videos.
oh,
I've seen documentaries like, yeah, we let him bleed to death. We did this. We caught the ambulance off.
was a-
Like this is out there. This is evidence on the FBI. Anyways, I don't. Not,
Yeah, and when I talk to the FBI agents now, and I've talked to quite a few, it's very funny, and not funny, I guess I shouldn't say funny because that's obviously something whatever to me. They all like they were programmed. We're a different FBI agency now.
Oh yeah, no, they are. They are.
There's, but that
You got assholes and bad eggs in every organization.
yeah, but that is literally
Um,
every time I've talked to an FBI agent about it, they do.
Yeah.
It's like a cookie cutter.
when you start saying DB Cooper, Ruby Ridge, Waco, they're like, it's not us anymore.
Yeah, that's we're different now. So that's they don't deny, and as you said, there's actually, and we'll get into that. Actually, there's the guy that killed my dad admitting to killing my dad. So not only killing my dad,
Yeah.
murdering my dad.
Special Agent Nick
O'Hara.
O'Hara.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw a video of him kind of talking about it, and he was all
Very proud of it.
very proud of it. Had his gun on the wall behind him,
Yeah.
which is his personal
He took his personal gun,
gun, not his service revolver,
as
but,
shotgun. It was a
shotgun.
Shotgun.
And
It had a notch in it. And he's like, see that notch right there?
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I can see being devil's advocate. He's a federal agent. His job is to go after criminals. And hey, I killed the most notorious criminal in modern history, and I'm notching my stock because I did that. I can see that a little bit, but there's a whole other side of the story here. So, let's go back a little bit before
Yeah,
before that trigger was pulled. I'll try my best because I'm a space cadet as well. Um, but yeah, so now the house is surrounded. What happens?
oh, no, it wasn't a house.
Or
It was a farm.
the farm. So she's on the bullhorn.
He's on a bullhorn.
Mom
So-
slaps.
Yeah, and they catch two of them. And the story was, he literally, I guess he got there was all these canal systems. This farm, and essentially he, guess what he probably did in Vietnam, used reeds, went underwater, and just he knew the canal system, I guess, because he grew up there.
Yeah.
So I guess the canal system went way outside the perimeter and then bounced.
Grabbed a bamboo straw and just kind of swam.
Yeah, I could.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, he totally did. I mean, so he totally, probably not bamboo, some type of
Right.
reef.
So they used in Vietnam, like the Viet Cong would do that. They'd hide underwater with like bamboo straws and then it'd come up and ambush in the
Yeah.
rice paddies and stuff. Okay, so he gets away
He gets away
this day.
this day. Yep, yep. So again, I believe he was out 6 months, and during that time, their MO, or they were robbing banks.
Him and Melvin.
Melvin Walker.
Okay.
And through time, and this is why Melvin Walker. I guess I could jump. Should I jump to Melvin? Okay, so my dad was killed 6 months later after this. I'm gonna jump ahead, 1985, 1986. I'm a teenager, and or I'm barely teenager, but I answered the door in the middle of the day. It must have been summer, and there's this man sitting there, and this is less than 10 years later. And the man introduces himself as Melvin Walker. So I was excited. I just like, I was, kid. I obviously know exactly who this man is. I never met him before. Like, so first time I ever met him, I only knew him by name. And I talked to him for at least an hour. And this, tell you some more stories about me. He wanted to tell me things about, and I don't know if it was guilty conscience. He just wanted to tell me what a great man my dad was again. He was like, I want you to know, and I actually have heard this many times. Your mom was the only person your dad had ever been with. Even when we were on the run, like your dad was just the most faithful man. That type of stuff. So when he showed up, he definitely had a purpose of really wanting to tell him. And I don't know. I think he asked me if my mom was there. So oddly, he wanted to see my mom, I think, but he spent a lot of time just telling me about my dad. Nothing I hadn't heard of, but in his mind, he wanted to tell me that. So he's like, hey, I think he gave me a number. Here's my info. Here's where I'm staying. I called my mom up, and my mom absolutely freaked out. Do not answer the door. I'm calling the FBI. And I didn't know. I mean, I was excited. Yeah, I can just
Sure.
remember the feeling of being confused when I called my mother of, "Why are you so upset?" And she immediately said, "He should be spending the rest of his life in prison. What do you mean?"
That's my question is how is this guy coming to your did he escape?
And that's what my mother actually assumed, that the man has escaped, because before the prison, escape, before he escaped from my father, I believe he was serving a life sentence. And I believe the mandatory minimum on a prison escape is 10 years.
Yeah, he's life at this point.
Yeah. And besides, there was kidnapping charges. There was 6, 7 bank robberies. I mean, you name it. Yeah, there's a couple life sentences in there.
Mm. So I can probably assume what happened, but I'm
Yeah.
gonna let you.
So, and at that moment, my mom said, "He turned your dad in."
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Immediately. My mom, pretty smart. She had a doctorate, educated woman. She first thing she's like, "It he turned your dad in."
Makes sense.
Yeah. And that was just like, you know, 10 years later.
It's a pretty big trade-off though. Trade in DB Cooper will let you stay free for the rest of your life when you're on a life sentence. That's
My dad, so every story, like, there's a lot of stories of interactions with people in my, especially family, because we had a big family down there in North Carolina. Everybody came up to me and told me they were bragging that they were gonna kill him on sight, that he embarrassed them more than anybody. So, when they did kill him, wasn't a big, surprise, but that was always their plan. Like, literally everybody's like, "Oh, they said they were gonna kill him on sight. They couldn't let him live." I mean,
let's talk about that. So Melvin turns in, I assume.
that's the
It's common sense.
it's just
Like how else would that even happen,
yeah,
right?
yeah, outside of it's odd how he
Is he still alive?
no,
He's passed.
he's passed, yeah.
Okay. So let's fast forward then to the actual raid or whatever the hell
The ambush?
the warrant,
The ambush, yeah.
or I should say lack of.
Yeah, there was yeah.
There's no warrant. Okay, so what happens?
Um, so and there was witnesses to this as well, and I'm funny about it. I'm not trying to have my door kicked in, but that
You've
could
got
go this college.
you've got no liability in
You
this.
know, I know, but, um, the story went and there were so they had commandeered this house or entered it for a couple days while they were I think the story was they were, I think, robbing a bank in Alabama.
The suspected house that he was living
Correct.
in,
Yeah.
they
They had set up camp.
staked out.
They were inside, so it wasn't they were inside. But point is, all the neighbors, everybody was very aware of what was going on because they had essentially came and I guess there was FBI agents even in other yards, and, um, my mother said that there was actual witnesses that she talked to afterwards, even though they didn't really want to, testify, but that my dad, when he came to the door, he opened the door, he had both hands full of groceries. And immediately was shot as soon as the door opened.
Yeah.
And the official FBI story was he pulled a gun on them, had a shootout. How do you shoot out when they're, yeah, not a thing. But,
'Cause the witnesses said it happened as soon as you walked in the door, you
yeah,
heard
as
shots.
soon as the door opened, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Was there any evidence of a gun?
I mean, not that
Nobody's ever talked about your dad having a
yeah,
physical firearm.
they said he did.
Well, where's the evidence? Where's the photo of that?
There is no evidence.
Okay.
The FBI and the
Which shouldn't be hard to produce, right? It's just, "Hey, here's the firearm that you
there's
used."
never
Typically, that's talked about.
that it doesn't exist as far as I know.
So, no warrant, scoping out a house, staging in a house for 2 days, waiting for him to come home to the suspected house. He and did Walker also stay with him in this house?
He stayed with him, but weirdly, Walker dropped him off and he drove down the street and got arrested.
Interesting.
Yeah, they didn't go
Which
in.
makes sense now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, this is
And
the
very
plan.
peacefully
Drop 'em off.
arrested.
Yeah.
Yeah, very peacefully arrested. And here's the bigger thing that, and I didn't even know. I mean, my mother and grandmother. So I showed you some autopsy pics from my father. Um, And my grandmother had,
which we won't show
We're-
out of
we're-
respect.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, we can talk about them. I'm just not going to show them. That my grandmother and my mother were filing a wrongful death suit after this because they had a lot of evidence, including the autopsies, witnesses. I found a handwritten note from my mother talking about how they had a witness of right after the shooting, an ambulance came there and they sent the ambulance away and it wouldn't come back till after it passed. And with that, here's the crazy thing. This might not surprise people. My grandmother said that my grandmother at this point had divorced her first husband and had married Ari Holland, who was very rich. And the reason that matters is they showed up at their door with the IRS and said, if you move forward with a wrongful death suit, your great-great-grandchildren will be poor.
No way.
Yep.
I mean, I shouldn't be surprised.
So and my mom said this too, that my mom was audited for years. But, and as working a W-2, I guess not, like she was, yeah.
Wasn't running companies or
Yep.
any of that stuff, just working.
My grandmother flat out said, like, they didn't move forward because they took everything.
Sure, they would have.
Yeah. So they actually
You said,
weaponized.
let's talk about the wrongful death. Why did they consider it a wrongful death?
Well, there was a lot of things. Obviously, new evidence came out, literally a video of the guy that shot him bragging, not just talking,
Right.
bragging.
And this is out there. You can see it.
Yeah, this is out there. Maybe you have some B-roll of it.
Oh, I will. Yeah, right now.
Saying that after he was shot, and you can attest to this. He talked about that he shot him dead center, hit him right in the heart, dead center. The autopsy pictures, he shot high shoulder. You've seen this.
I've seen it.
And he's on video, he said there was agents that wanted to administer aid. And his exact quote was, I told him, fuck him, let him bleed out.
And that's on camera.
That's on camera.
Yep.
And for anybody listening, if you understand law enforcement, whatever, that's called murder.
Well, you got to have a warrant.
No, but if I
you-
shoot you as law enforcement and you're now disarmed, let's just say there was my duty now is to save your life.
Yes. Yeah.
I feel-
Regardless if a weapon was in play or not,
Yeah, it doesn't
your
matter.
job is your duty is still to help somebody.
Yeah. So he was, and they let him bleed out on the porch. And not only wouldn't help them, they sent an ambulance away.
Yeah. Is there anything public knowledge about them sending the ambulance away? Did they say anything about that?
No.
Okay. Because looking at the autopsy photo of your dad, it is a high upper chest shot above the heart, almost right through the clavicle, which you might nick a lung in there. And I don't know if it was aught buck or a slug, but you can see
It was odd.
it was aught buck. But you're talking a tight pattern, super. I mean, it's a hole like that.
Yeah.
And then you can see probably where the wad slammed into
Yeah.
him.
In the autopsy report, there was scumwad.
And again, there's going to be a hell of a lot of internal trauma from that and bleeding out probably soon after, but it wasn't a heart shot. And if somebody would have probably got on that quickly and applied pressure, potentially a chest seal, because you probably have an upper quadrant, lung hit right there,
Right.
that person could live easily. Now, in today's world, speaking, right? Because we get
All you had to do is
shot all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even back then, they probably could have maintained that, but it sounds like they did push the ambulance away.
Well, the head FBI.
So he was dead on the scene. He wasn't dead in an ambulance.
Correct.
Yeah,
The head FBI,
that's weird.
again on tape, bragged that he denied him aid.
Okay.
Like that is the thing. That is exactly what happened. Like out of his own mouth.
Yeah. It's disturbing to hear that and then to see him proud, I've shot some people. A lot of guys have shot people, and I don't know anybody that's a good man that would sit there and be like, yeah, I don't give a shit. I don't care I just let him bleed out.
Yeah.
Like you may have that thought as an 18-year-old kid in combat, or, even in like I said, if you'd have met me 20 years ago, I was a different person. I was different. It was dark. Had a lot of shit going on, and all I wanted to do was get that out around the world. and thinking that would help until I started to realize the balance between, you know, the opposites, the good and evil, the yin and yang, whatever you want to call it. So you do have that, like, um, yeah, I killed somebody, but you don't, unless you're a total sociopath, and you talk about it like he does in that video,
It's
nobody should be proud of that. I'm not proud of any, even in the most piece of shit insurgent terrorist in the world that I've shot. I don't. There's a different mindset to that, um, and it's, well, shit. The decisions in battle. I think
yeah.
this is. Do you
Yeah,
mind if I
that's
read this
yeah,
real quick?
please. That's a yeah, great segue.
All right, so this is that letter I spoke of earlier that, um, that your dad wrote, and I assume this is when he was in Vietnam,
So no,
slightly after?
so this is not a letter. This is a paper he wrote for school,
Okay, okay.
and I'm not sure exactly what class. It might have just been an English class, and he wrote a paper.
Then there's a draft in here with a couple typos that he handwrit over, which is really cool. It's called "The Decision in Battle." This is when he got his Purple Heart. I was crouched in a shallow hand-dug ditch beside a large palm tree, which afforded limited protection from angry snapping and whining bullets which filled the air. Although excited, I was not frightened, but my mouth felt dry and I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. This was the moment in which all my training was directed. The enemy was only yards away beyond the clearing, and our own men were behind them, pushing them out into a narrow strip of trees and thick green jungle vegetation which lined the bank of the Mekong River. The enemy consisted of a small squad of men, which we outnumbered 3-1. They had a choice of either making a death stand, or making a run for cover across the field where I was posted. Suddenly, a short, small-built Vietnamese man, clad in black pajamas, ran out of the dense foliage into the open field in clear view. This was the enemy, and now it's my job to stop him. Would I be able to carry out this job for which I had been trained? In our culture, war is thought of a necessary part of survival, and depending on the particular time frame that one is born, there is a prevailing attitude for or against war. Most of us, who are young children after World War II, were nurtured on the ideas of war heroes fighting for one's country and killing the enemy. In most war movies or books, the John Waynes and Audie Murphy type hero shown killing the enemy, it's a typo right there, in the face of insurmountable odds, and the enemy is usually depicted as a stereotype robot in uniform. Seldom was the thought brought out that this enemy soldier might also be a human being with human emotions, with family ties, and future aspirations, just like those of the hero. What about my enemy in the black pajamas? This enemy is now within 20 yards, running diagonally towards me, but oblivious to my presence. From the way he was leaning forward and clutching his side with his right hand, it appeared that he may have already been wounded. Though he appeared unarmed, no AK-47, I raised my M16 to my left shoulder. Oh, he's left-handed, huh? And ordered him to halt. Dang Lai! Ignoring my command, he continued running as fast as possible, and I fired a short burst of automatic rifle fire, not to kill, only to warn, because he's not armed at this point. Or most men in combat would just juice this dude. Sorry. You're in man black pajamas, which is a worthy adversary. I'm off script here. I would have shot his ass quick as hell. So again, he continued to run across the field towards the 6-foot-high elephant grass, and then I had to decide whether to kill him immediately or overcome him physically before he reached cover. Common sense told me to shoot, but my sense of fair play would not allow me to shoot what appeared to be an unarmed man. I charged out of my protected position, determined to overcome him before he escaped into the grass. Within a few seconds, rifle in hand, I narrowed the space between him and me to tackling distance. As the volume of automatic fire became intense, I began to seriously question my motives and intentions for coming out into the open. At the time, it dawned on me the crack and snap of the bullets was getting uncomfortably close. Suddenly, my enemy paused, buckled at his knees, and crumbled to the ground. A split second later, full, still in full stride, I heard an ear-shattering explosion, immediately felt burning sensation, and huge chunks of metal ripped into my right arm and my left leg. It was now my turn to crumble onto the ground. Later in the hospital, I learned that a fellow soldier had observed my supposedly unarmed enemy holding a grenade close to his body, which is why he was clutching his right side. By his decision to shoot him, undoubtedly saved my life. The enemy soldier smothered the blast with his body. Until this time, I had always felt that I could perform the job of killing the enemy in a true John Wayne fashion. I did not realize that killing, even in war, I did not realize that killing, even in war, oftentimes meant difficult moral decisions. I now realize that the conventional war ideas of killing the enemy could not easily replace my personal standards, even under military orders. In my mind, this was not just the enemy, but a man. A man, perhaps, with a wife, a family, waiting for him back home while he performed the job called war. Many men justify unnecessary killing in different situations with the excuse that they are not responsible for their actions. They are only victims of circumstances. In truth, through war does not change man. Only man can change man. Richard Floyd McCoy, English Class 212, March 5th, 1971. To me, that's whew, I mean, I think everybody that hears that, that could reflect back on their own combat experience. Um, yeah, I grew up on the posters, man. I grew up on the love story of what it would be like to be that image one day as a kid, and then I become it. I start training to become it. I love the story of the pain and the misery and the sacrifice that you need to do in order to become that image that you saw on that poster as a kid or that movie, the John Waynes, the Heartbreak Ridges, the Full Metal Jackets, in today's world, the Uncommon Valors and you know, lone survivors and whatever, right? That kids get to watch in today's world, and you grow up thinking that that's the way war should be until you're in it. And so I think that really tells a story of who your dad really was in the thick of things. Being able to identify that most men couldn't do. Um, as a F-35 flies by out the window, everybody heard that. Um, that shows not only a sense of duty to his country, but to himself, to his morals, his ethics, his values, which is the dad you want to remember,
Yeah.
right? I think the heroic aspect of that is what everybody looks to, um, and then and then you go to the story of the FBI, and it's like, nope, he was a criminal. It's like, no, he was also a good man, um, and
I believe that. I mean, and nobody's ever going to change my mind. So it doesn't really matter, I guess, because it doesn't. But I, we talked about why I wanted to talk about certain things, and I mean, I want to talk about he's a good man. I mean, I want to talk about, he was a war hero. He did so many good things, and just a loving father, a loving husband, a patriot, and it's 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 been easy for people that didn't know him, or or even our government or whatever, to make him lesser than, and he was so much more than that, and that's my story. That's what I want to get out there. Is
well, I think that's why a lot of guys, and I think listeners would appreciate that side of him and the snap, the switch, right? Because man, I'm not saying I'm going to snap or switch. It's just saying that I've had my own issues with the government and the VA. They're doing it to me right now, with my own kids, and there's probably hundreds of thousands of stories of dismay and frustration and disappointment and anger of guys that have tried to ask for help that don't. It's, one of the big things that I'm working on now, just in as a PTG coach and trying to advise guys and help people. We've lost what 40 something. How many people lost in Vietnam? It's like almost 50,000
Yeah, it was
people,
close to
something like that
50,000, yeah.
that we know of.
And that's not the wounded, that's
Right.
come back, yeah.
Right. And then what 400 plus thousand in World War II. And, you see these big numbers. Korea, another big number, almost 50,000 there, or like 44,000. Don't quote me on these numbers, but they're around that range. And then in the global war on terror, the last 25 years, we've lost about 9,000 service members in action, in combat. You think about 25 years, Vietnam was what? 10, 11 years old, long, something like that.
With
25 years of
three
the, of the
conflict, yeah.
GWAT, we lost 9,000 people. And you can say, well, that's because of technology and we're better, we're more precise, we're this, we're that, we're more organized. I mean, combat's still combat, man. War's still war. But we did do a fairly good job, but it's a different war. You're not sending just massive amounts of
Right.
people and young kids that are drafted that don't know their ass from a hole in the ground, that don't want to be there. Like, we have a volunteer military. And so that's a very special, unique thing that we have in the entire world.
I was gonna say, that's another thing. My dad was pure voluntary.
Yeah, never got
Yeah,
drafted, did
right.
he? Yeah. And so now you look at like VA care or just management programs or leadership in the United States military, which if you watch all the other, great podcasts and people out there starting to come out and talk about it, it's frustrating to know that we just hit 140,000 suicides in the last 25 years that are identified as GWAT veterans. So our actual death toll of the GWAT is almost 150,000 people.
Same.
That's a lack of compassion, a lack of care for people that would put foot to ass for their country and go all the fucking way if necessary. It means give your life, so others may have a small taste of freedom. So we can maintain this 4.5% of the world that we are, right? Out of 8 billion people, we're the only 4.5% of people on the face of this planet that enjoy freedom because we have, and then this is the shitty part, right? Being in the industrial military complex or I'm a disruptive thorn in its side. At least I try to be as much as possible. And it's frustrating. It's a balance. And so even my own son going to the military, it's like he will be mistreated. And so I know what I'm going to do to support and help him through networks. But like guys like your dad, they didn't have it, man. And there's a lot of people that still don't have it. I don't have it. And that's why we snap or go to a different side of good and helping and starting foundations and organizations to try to do it ourselves. And that's what a lot of great human beings have done in the last 25 years, to try to prevent this very thing, of somebody snapping and going to a life of crime or suicide or drinking or all this other that's 140,000 people, by the way, that have identified themselves as committing suicide. Like it's clear-cut case. That's not including the dude that jerks the wheel into a bridge embankment and when he's driving down the road one day, that's just an automobile-related death. No, that's also suicide. You can't count them. That could be twice as much, Yeah.
Drank themselves to death, drugs, yeah.
So it's it's near and dear to my heart, man. So I think that's why I kind of feel, that side with your dad more and understand why he would do that. He's a man of action. He loves to help people. Even while he's committing a crime, he still try to help people,
And that's, again,
And I think that's
I try to tell those because there's so many little side stories, side quests. So, but the ones I want to touch on is that, I mean, it's real easy.
Do you think that's also created the culture around this DB Cooper, like Cooper Con, like, a Comic Con? There's a Cooper Con apparently.
Yeah, I think the mystery is, I think just the mystery causes that, like, because, I mean, there are a lot, just so you know, even though some people, like, there's a whole, let's call it an industry that exists on the mystery. Like, they don't want it solved. We talked about, like, there's
still restaurants, there's bars that are all like themed DB Cooper.
Yeah, there's people literally make their living off the name DB Cooper, not, just the mystery of it. It's not the idea that that person is a boogeyman. It doesn't exist. It just jumped into the night and, they just disappeared. And we don't know who it is. Like all the other people from Hoffa to Amelia Earhart. Oh, I guess Jack the Ripper is different, but we know who they are. They just disappeared. Where, for DB Cooper, for people, it's
Point. You don't know
we don't know. Was it your dad?
until
Was it
now.
my dad? Yeah, was it your grandpa? That's what a lot of people, it's just the everyday guy that pulled off something that definitely have some skill sets to pull off. But
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what people are drawn to. It's
I mean, I've always been drawn to it, and not the crime side, but just the action side of it, and trying to go, wait, this guy's got to be somebody that knew what they were doing. They had to have had some military experience.
and we didn't go into the operandi, the modes, of him and both of them. That's the similarities where he gave the pilots very distinct instructions of wind flaps, I think it was 15 degrees, speed, altitude, everything. Like he obviously, well, he was a fixed wing pilot and a helicopter pilot. So,
Yeah.
but point is, when people talk about DB Cooper, they're like, oh, it's just somebody that didn't know anything and did it. It's no, it's
You have to know something.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, and again, and people might be watching this going, well, Travis, you're just agreeing. It's like, no, I've looked at as much evidence as possible and went like, dude, that's hard not to say that your dad's DB Cooper. It's just don't.
well, that's why I don't talk about
impossible.
my experience of what I've been told, because everybody's like, well, I was like, I just want to talk about the hard evidence. Like that's all it really matters. That's all people
Yeah.
care about. It doesn't matter what I think, what I was told, because that's already everybody's like, oh, it's bullshit. Oh, he was a kid, and I wasn't. Arguably, I was a baby
Yeah.
when all this happened.
You think about a dude taking over a jetliner, which takes balls, using a grenade and a handgun that wasn't real, or was real but wasn't
No, it
wasn't
wasn't loaded.
loaded. So he had no intention of actually hurting anybody. It was a fake grenade. And then manages to get the ramp rear butt door down off the 727, which you have to have some knowledge there. And I know a lot of people say, well, he didn't really know what he was doing. He was trying to figure it out. Well, that's exactly what I would do. I would act like an idiot, And again, they didn't see everything that he was doing back there. Except for looking under the crack. The pilots were looking under the crack in the door because he blocked the peephole on the
Right.
cockpit door. And so then to jump at night at a specific altitude, specific flaps, you got to know the aircraft and what its stall speed is. That takes a lot of knowledge. But he's an aviator, okay? So he can easily look at different aircraft and dissect it and understand its minimums and maximums and everything else. But then to improvise the parachutes, he didn't have a bag because they messed up the satchel bag that he asked for.
Yeah, he asked for a knapsack, which is, I guess, common terminology for at least in the military, or something where you could have
back then, yeah, it was
essentially attached with D-rings to your rig.
Yeah.
And
So-
they brought in literally a bank bag, like a simple bit with no handles.
And so he took the one parachute that he jumped with and then used the other parachute the cordage. He took it apart, which you have to know what you're doing because he was a jumper, and then makes a makeshift harness system for the money and then jumps at night over an unknown drop zone, right? Because he doesn't have ATAC and all the shit that we have nowadays. He can't really, I mean, if he knew what he was doing flying over that area, he could have flown that area quite a bit as a pilot and be like, okay, if I fly at night, I'm going to study the area and I'll know what lights are what plants are what, like an LP plant or a nuke plant or something that really is a distinctive.
Yeah, I think Portland, like the Washington, not the Washington, what's the river? I know the river.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I forget the name.
It's a big river. But anyway, there's lights right there.
So he knows probably that and had an idea where to go. But then to jump November 27th, 24th. Okay, what's the temperature like up there during that time of year?
I'm sure 10,000 feet is cold. But I would assume, obviously, November is one of those months that could be cold or warm. But
Well, nighttime November in Washington State's probably 40 degrees.
yes, yeah.
Okay, now take probably with barometric pressure and temperature and humidity up there in that area of the world, you're looking at probably more of a 4 degrees versus a 3 degrees temperature change per 1,000 feet. So therefore you can go 10 times 4. So now it's 0 degrees at exit altitude. He's wearing a suit, no gloves, and sunglasses, and jumps out into 0 degree temperatures, lands on the ground, which you can do. I've done that before.
Yeah.
It's not fun. Then he lands somewhere and he's in a round parachute. So he's got trees and all the other stuff. So you got to know what you're doing. You just don't jump out of over an unimproved area or an area not known without kind of having some skills to get out of that situation. Cause you can land in trees 50% of the time if you're not on an approved drop zone. So like there's a lot of information that goes. That's the kind of stuff that I dug into. I was like, wait, this guy's got to know a little bit more than what people are saying, and he's acting like two totally different people within 5 months on an airplane, right? Because his character was apparently different to the flight attendants and his appearance.
Well, so here's a couple things. So obviously, here's one thing that people, naysayers, and I'll get in this. They're like, well, people on the DB Cooper, the flight attendants were really the only ones that were aware of what was happening. They're like, oh, they couldn't identify my dad in a lineup. So guess what? They couldn't identify in a lineup of the one he was convicted of.
What's that?
Him.
Oh, they couldn't identify either one.
Yeah, even the ones he was convicted of, the stewardess couldn't pick him out of a lineup because he wore a disguise.
Yeah.
So, and the one again, because some of the stuff that they're saying, oh, it was different is because, well, now you have the guy. So now you can start nitpicking because there's not a mystery here. And one of the things are like, oh, well, he disappeared and then came back with a disguise on. Well, you know that now because you got him.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess and the one he was.
Oh yeah, that can make it kind of make everybody believe now all of a sudden they have information that they really didn't.
Exactly. But on both of them, everybody's like, well, on the DB Cooper, they were shown pictures of McCoy and nobody could identify him. The same thing, the flight attendants couldn't identify him on the one he was convicted of.
Mm.
And we talked about warrants. They didn't have a warrant when they arrested my dad and got $500,000. They found $500,000 minus $20 on the one he was arrested for. That was part of the appeal when my dad was trying to appeal before he escaped. They're like, they literally showed up without a warrant and searched their house and got all the evidence that they needed to convict him without a warrant. To this day, that it was unconstitutional.
Shouldn't be admissible.
100%.
Yeah.
But they couldn't let that go because, up for.
And one other interesting thing that I heard, so if you can help me, verify this or not. We talked about Walker potentially ratting him out, right? Which makes total sense. But go back to the other jump where his friend or something called an anonymous person.
So
a best friend that he served with in Vietnam, who was a special forces officer, a guy named Ben something.
Yeah, he was I think a state trooper also, but
at the time he had got out of Vietnam.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But here's the story, and
roommates. Weren't they roommates or something?
I think they were roommates in the National Guard.
Okay.
That man was married and was having an affair with my aunt. So they gloss over a lot of, there's
typical military saga.
And he obviously had no idea what was going on because my aunt, I guess, had an idea. So I guess when it was happening, it was essentially live on the news. All right. And by that, like it was hijacking take time. So, just, hours. And my aunt, who was now having an affair with this guy, calls him up and says, "I'm pretty sure that's Richard." And that's actually how even though if he was a friend and whatever, and a battle buddy, he's definitely whatever.
You think he might have been pressured because he was probably a state trooper now, and if he would have been found out that he knew anything about it, could have been liable and sent.
I don't know what obviously I obviously fuck him, but I have
ratchet boys out no matter what.
Yeah, it's yeah, exactly. Actually, I got a few people I hide bodies with, and I assume they're not going to rat me out.
That's right.
And I have no bodies hidden, but you know what I'm saying. And I obviously supposedly he was close friends with him, and he did rat him out. But the story, and again, that dude, fuck him, and 100%, he was married, and did not want that to come out. But and I think he stayed married, but
Wonder if his wife and him are still alive.
I believe he's dead. Somebody told me that a while ago, so because I think I've asked.
All right.
But my aunt's still alive. Um, um, yeah,
What's her name?
Denise.
Sorry, Aunt Denise.
Yeah. So
Part of the story, man. Part of the story.
yeah. Oh, she and so November 24th in 1971 is actually Thanksgiving Eve. Now, think about this. My dad, mom, very poor, and 2 young kids at home. They asked my aunt, she says this on, and she denied this at trial, but says this on tape, that my mother asked her to sit us for Thanksgiving. She came to watch us. Yeah. And they went to Vegas. Was
The night of the first jump.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
EB jump.
And they slept in a car. They didn't have money for a hotel. They just went to Vegas, sleep in a car on a family holiday.
Okay.
And she said, well, that's the story. But anyway,
Because that's why they said he wasn't potentially the
because
Cooper,
she
because
testified.
he was in Vegas.
Well, she's also testified the original trial that he was home
Okay.
on Thanksgiving. But recently, when she was offered money, she's like, yeah, well, she's like, I'm not going to get in trouble. No, it's been so many years. She's like, yeah, I was watching the kids and they went, all I know is they went to Vegas. They weren't home.
Hmm. So she dropped him off at the airport, didn't she?
No, they drove. They drove to Vegas.
Oh, they did. Okay.
And
But he had to get to Denver, didn't he? Wasn't that where
No,
the flight originated?
Denver
Or-
was the second jump.
Second jump. Okay. That's right. The first one
So,
was-
and this is, again, when I talk about the November jump, there's a lot of things I don't know. So what I do know, and the FBI actually has this information. That's why I don't know how there was a collect call. I don't know if it was later that night, or on Thanksgiving Day from Vegas to the house. And it was my mom and dad checking on us from Vegas. So obviously from Vegas to Portland's a short trip. And that's what I assume happened. But they stationed out of Vegas.
Hmm.
But for sure,
I wonder if your
Facts.
dad's voice was on the call, or
well, they wouldn't, I
they
mean,
wouldn't know back then.
back then they
Yeah,
didn't.
it was just a collect call. So it
Yeah.
appeared to be that they were in Vegas, but
Right.
could have easily been somewhere else.
Right. Well, I don't know. But that's
Could
in,
have said her to Vegas, and then he popped a flight up to
Yeah.
Portland.
yeah, we don't, yeah,
Yeah.
no idea. But for sure, they were out of town that weekend or that Thursday.
Okay. But yeah, that's pretty cool, man. This is all coming to light. So what happens now?
Nothing. I'm glad.
Well, what's funny is, I mean, it's like, this is like DB Cooper's finally, in my opinion, personally, right, is solved until the FBI comes back and says something.
Right.
So I think there should absolutely be a part 2 to this when we find out what the hell goes down with them.
I'm totally down with that.
And I know more's coming from you guys. We'll see what that is.
Yeah. Again, I am speaking about it, but you have to understand, like, this has always been my life. Like,
Yeah.
I don't expect, I mean, I guess I'll have people say cool and I have haters, I kind of already have that. So it doesn't really change. So,
You got to have haters to validate what you're doing, And then
I mean, even in the martial arts, it's a very haterish world.
well,
But,
I've been asked, how do I deal with them? And I'd say first off, I feel sorry for them. Secondly, I'd much rather, and I think anybody with some values and morals and ethics would say that I'd much rather be hated than be a hater.
Yeah.
So
I like that.
And speaking of that, the culture, I know that's why I ask what's next, because there is a massive culture of people out there that want to know what happens with this. They're going to fight it. They're going to be the ones that are saying, nah, it's full of shit. This is all BS. Like, prove it. You can't, because you can.
Yeah, that's my stance. I literally have the proof. And
I mean, I got a friend of ours who runs a company called Finance Maneuver, and he sent me this T-shirt, which I was in class, I'll put a picture up at the back, 'cause I'm not gonna turn around right now, but, we were in a class last week with your buddy Mark, who I'm gonna have on the podcast, as well, um, and I look over and I see this DB Cooper 727 and a guy jump out the back, and I go up to the student like, "Hey, what's that shirt?" This was last week, by the way, to Florida.
Yep.
And he's like, "Oh, it's some, it's an old thing. I forget the guy's name." I was like, "That's cool." He's like, "Why?" I said, "I was just wondering." And then Mark goes up and goes, "Hey," and tells him that we're doing this podcast. He's freaking out. So, like, and I called Jordan um, at Finance Maneuver, and I said, "Hey, what's up with the shirt you did?" He's like, "Oh, I'm a huge fanatic, man, and, like, 6 months ago, he just made the shirt that I'm wearing."
It's a
I
cool
was like,
shirt.
"Dude, you gotta hear the story. What's gonna happen. This is coming out pretty soon." And I said, "How big of a fanatic are you?" And then he sends me a picture of his tattoo, and his whole back of his leg is this badass, like, DB Cooper, or your dad now, this jump, out of the 727. It's beautiful art. I'll put a picture of that up too. I'm sure Jordan wouldn't mind. But, yeah, so there's this
You
huge.
showed it to me. It's like, obviously, I think it's cool because it is what it is, but the artwork is amazing.
Is amazing.
Whoever the artist was on point.
Yeah. So, anyways, you wanna get you wanna get one of your T-shirts to support, whatever. But, yeah, so I think everybody out there is gonna say, "Well, what happens now?" I think that's what I'm looking forward to see.
Yeah,
As we're
I still don't think much changes for me. I mean, I
Yeah,
know
it
that.
sound like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep on doing me, and yeah,
Well, it's a piece of history I think that's,
yeah.
a lot of people have followed for a long time, and, I mean,
It might
it's like
lead to something else for me. I mean, I'm pretty
yeah,
into what I do, outside of this.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, it's like, this is what we know about your dad. What do we don't know about him?
yeah.
That's the interesting side. Everybody's got that other side, that other
So
story.
going down this rabbit hole since 2020, like I've learned, like even when we're going through the military stuff, you taught me, or I learned some things about my dad.
Today.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't know. I mean, that's well, again, I was a baby. So there's so much about my dad that I don't know. It was cool to meet the guy that I was telling you that knew Jimmy Hoffa and then knew my dad. Like it was just cool to meet people that I didn't even know existed and then
Yeah.
get to tell me about my dad. Like
Yeah, and the
it's
guy that was Jimmy Hoffa's friend, I don't think you said earlier, was also the guy that gave the dental
pays to my dad.
paste to your dad. So
Right.
Jimmy Hoffa's buddy gave that's crazy,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Small world, even in the criminal world.
Man, it
So,
is. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. It's a cool, to me, again, I'll just say I'm a fan of my dad. I mean, outside of DB Cooper, I'm a fan of who he was. I dig his like I've always talked about his military. Outside of you, obviously, that this is your gig at the military, but that's always been part of the story I've been proud of. I know, we didn't go and like his Distinguished Flying Cross and what he did there, and like you said, it was to you very would you care sanitary for.
Yeah, I think, when you read into military citations, for awards, that some of them are extremely detailed, and then some of them are like, "Yeah, he did this and flew some missions and shot some guys, and that's it. Congratulations, here's your Distinguished Flying Cross." And then, of course, the Bronze Star, we just found him with his ribbons as well. There's no record of him having a Bronze Star. So the Distinguished Flying Cross and the air medals and all that stuff is, of course, gonna be talked about because it's a helicopter pilot. And in my opinion, okay, a lot of aviators and guys in like top tier units would be more of a subject matter expert to explain this than maybe even me. But there are some guys that get medals and there's no citations at all for obvious reasons because of the level of clearance for that mission that you would be on, like top secret type TSSCI clearances that are beyond. Nobody needs to ever know about this. Hey, here's your medal, and the unit knows about it. Not even your family needs to know about this. Nobody, but hey, here's your Bronze Star, or here's your Silver Star, or here's your Distinguished Flying Cross. So even though it had his mission of what he did and flying in the fog in the morning when no other pilots would do it, speaks to his previous career as a Mac VSOG guy, in my opinion. That's always going to be the shit magnet. He's always going to go. He always has got to have that sense of duty, and that super sense of justice. And we all have that. Everybody has a sense of justice, and then some people have a super sense of justice, which can make can can make you get into some serious shit. And it takes a long time in our life to realize that, man, maybe if we could control that impulsivity, or as like Jordan Peterson calls the monster. I think that's the balance that you read in his stories. That's the true warrior aspect, and that's what I think we appreciate about a man that would be willing to go all the way because of that sense of duty for others, to save all those guys' lives. And then in one of his missions alone, he killed like 20 NVA soldiers from the helicopter by himself. Um, and then to go back and continue to do it again and again and again, that's the guy you want to know. But he also represents the balance, the darkness, the yin and the yang. If you look at it, is sometimes the whitefish, if it's out of balance, can eat the blackfish, and that's out of balance. The blackfish can come back and eat the whitefish, and then those little tiny dots are to remind us, hey, you need to equalize this. You need to find yourself. And I think he was trying to find that, but sometimes the blackfish gets a hold of you, and you can't let go of it, and then it just changes you. And a lot of guys out there that are on the line, they need to realize balance is the most important. You don't need to be on one side or the other. Just, sometimes, like I've been taught through a lot of programs, and, to fly from the eagle's eye and just look down. Don't grab a hold of something, just fly over and observe and see how that feels instead of latching in. We get emotional when we start thinking about something. It's like, just fly over it, man. I don't think he could see that anymore. I think he just grabbed the blackfish and ran with it.
Yeah, definitely. You're
And it's a lesson for all of us. And, I thank you for coming on today and sharing that, a story of a heroic man that really did truly make the world a better place because of what he did for his brothers in combat, what he did for, his nation as a whole. But then also at the other side of that, it's like, man, it's rough.
Yeah, it's, again, I think it's all cool, and I guess even the crime, and by that I don't. You get people will probably definitely disagree with that, but hey, if
Well,
you're
it's like
that,
I said it earlier, right? It's like why would God, source energy, or whatever you believe in, put flowers on the earth just to hide snakes underneath it? And it's like, so how do I smell the flowers without getting bit? And then the other side of that is how do I not also sometimes jump up and bite the person smelling the flower? It's balance. The world's supposed to be that way. It is. And stories like this remind us of good and evil, and hopefully shows us where we should live. Dude, thanks for coming
oh,
on
yeah, I
today, man. This
appreciate
is
it.
awesome.
That this was great, and you were the perfect. Yeah, this is great.
You know, finally, who is DB Cooper? Even if you don't want to know, you still want to know. So what do those people do now? Like, well, I can't make my T-shirts anymore. And do it. No, now it's just the real McCoy.
Yeah, check out Richard McCoy. He's pretty cool.
The real McCoy, man.
Yeah,
That's what it is. So, brother, thank you for what you do, and for the warrior community, and sharing this story of your dad and your family. And I know it's been rough, but I'm looking forward to see what happens in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, brother.
All right.